and welcome back to our One Wild and Precious Lives and Our Dogs. Today I'm talking to Katie Homan, a professor of philosophy in the Midwest of the United States. Katie and I met because she and her lab, Lily, were in one of my dog training classes. And over the course of this class, we ventured off topic quite a bit. And we ended up talking, among other things, about people, or specifically women, being referred to as pet parents or dog moms. I learned that this was part of your research area, actually, and that you, Katie, felt strongly about it, although maybe for different reasons than I personally feel strongly about it, too. So obviously, I had to rope you into coming on my podcast and talking about this really interesting topic. Katie, welcome to the podcast. Please introduce yourself, your pronouns, and very importantly, tell us a little bit about Lily and your second dog.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I don't think it was really roping me into it, but I'm excited to be here anyway. So I'm Katie, and I use she and her pronouns. As Chrissy said, I am a philosophy professor, and I have two dogs now. One is Lily, who did the training class with Chrissy. She is a 2-year-old black lab, and she is feisty. She is very playful, and this was one of the things that we talked about a lot was play in the class. And she is also very determined in what she wants and how she wants it. And our other dog is JJ. We don't know how old he is. He's somewhere between 5 and 10. He's some kind of lab husky mix. And he is very shy and likes to be very close to home and close to people. So where Lily is venturing out as far as she can go, JJ is sticking very close with his people. Yeah, so I would say that this idea of being like a dog mom or pet parent is kind of a newer area of research for me, so I haven't gotten into it too much, but it sort of coalesced when I realized very quickly that we needed a lot of training with JJ and Lily. And some of my first experiences talking to other training professionals is that they would address me as mom. So they would use sort of like Lily's voice and be like, "Oh, mom, I want some treats." And I was kind of caught off by that because I am child free by choice. And so sort of a weird thing to think about the dog as my child, even though I think it was right, the trainer's trying to preserve or recognize that we have a relationship and that the basis of our training is forming and cultivating and preserving that relationship. And then my philosophical research is on like philosophy of play, but I'm especially interested in hermeneutics, so the philosophy of interpretation and having a conversation, and especially how it is that we can understand beings or things or humans or non-humans that don't communicate in the same way that I might. And so thinking about like, what is this relationship I have with my dog, because it's not really like a parent-child relationship, but it is, right, an important relationship. And so sort of thinking on the one hand about dog training and forming relationships, but it being almost exclusively cashed out in parent-child relationships. And then on the other hand, this philosophical interest in how do we form meaningful relationships, usually through language or some kind of communication, but a very different understanding of that. So
yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. So have you encountered, once you started looking for trainers for your dogs, and sorry, my dog is wanting some attention. Let her just briefly say hi. Hello.
Hi.
This is Game.
Oh, hi, Game.
A very important member of this podcast too.
Yes.
And I also, I mean, I have a strong relationship with her, but I am also childless by choice. We're about the same age. I'm 36. I think you're 37. I do not see her as my child by any means. I think some people do see their pets as children, but I just don't. And as a professional dog trainer, I myself never use the term dog mom or fur baby or fur child or pet parent or dog dad. Outside of my online classes that I teach at FDSA, most of my cases are behavior cases. And sometimes one of the options that I want to put on the table that I want the owner to be able to consider is rehoming the dog. It's never the only option I put out there, but sometimes I just want to be able to put it out there as something for them to think about. And I don't think we would ever consider rehoming our human children. So if the owner is thinking or trapped within that parent child paradigm, it's going to be much harder for them to even consider this option. And an even more difficult situation is I have suggested behavioral euthanasia in the past. This is something that happens very, very rarely, but it does happen. And being aware of how hard it is to make that decision in any case, thinking of a dog as your child just adds another layer of difficulty, in my opinion, because you would never put your child down. That's just not something you would do. So if you're thinking of your dog in that way, you can't really consider that option without your entire world falling to pieces. Your entire world is going to fall to pieces anyways, because that's a really difficult decision to make. But that makes me critical about it. And also the term adoption, I'm also not particularly comfortable with that one, because some people have adopted children, and then they go out to the local humane society and say, oh, we're going to adopt this puppy. Well, and then maybe it turns out that the dog they ended up with is just really not a good fit for this particular household. So maybe they will rehome the dog, but they've already told their adopted child that this dog is also adopted. So how's that child going to feel? I don't have children, so I don't know, but I'm assuming that at a certain age, as a child, you would make that connection of, oh, so because the dog was a bad dog, they'll get rehomed. But I'm also adopted. If I'm being bad, could I get rehomed as well? And that's also a dynamic. I just don't, I want to avoid that dynamic to ever happen to anyone. That just doesn't seem fair. So I come from a very pragmatic, practical point of view of criticizing. I'm sorry, my dog just destroyed part of my blanket fort. For our listeners, it's just I'm at an Airbnb and I've recorded one podcast here before, and my sound quality was very bad because it's a minimalistically designed space, so there's lots of echo. So this time I was going to be super smart and build this blanket and pillow fort around myself to get better sound quality, but I guess it's not going to happen after all. Well, Katie, let me ask you. So you don't think of Lily, and what's your other dog's name again? I'm sorry, Che Che?
JJ.
Come on, Che Che?
JJ.
So you don't think of them as your children. Have you found a term that does describe the relationship you have with them? How do you see it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Like I said, we've been working with different trainers, and some refer to us, my husband and I, as parents or dog mom and dad. Some trainers have used guardian, which I do like because there is sort of that recognition of we have brought these dogs into our lives without the dogs having a tremendous amount of choice over the matter. And it's our responsibility to provide care for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of recognizes that there's a difference in power, right, between the dog and me. But guardian also sounds kind of too official or something, or too formal. I like the idea that Lily is my companion. And I think that recognizes a little bit more of like the mutual relationship than just sort of like the
Mm-hmm.
top down human to dog. Um, I don't know what is like a good way to think about it. I'm thinking of 2 years ago, one of my sisters had a baby, and then my other sister adopted a little boy. And it was Mother's Day weekend. And it was also right after we had adopted JJ and Lily. So we were all at my parents' house celebrating Mother's Day.
Mm-hmm.
And JJ had just eaten some little baby rabbits, and Lily was going wild because she was like brand new and totally over aroused, and um, it wasn't setting either of them up for success. And then my sisters are opening like Mother's Day cards and gifts and things, and I had sort of a lot of hard feelings about that because it was always like very stressful, like trying to manage the dogs, especially around the human babies. And then a recognition like my sisters are now in like a different point in their life than how we had been. And so like that was hard. And but it was fine. But then this next Mother's Day, my sisters gave me like Mother's Day cards recognizing that I'm a good aunt to my nephews and a good dog mom. And like it was so well intentioned and it was very sweet and acknowledging like I don't have the same lifestyle as they do, but there's still something valuable in what I'm doing. But it was also like, but I'm not a mom, like I'm not a dog mom. And so I don't know. And I've been reading some stuff in philosophy about rethinking what it means to be a mother anyway. And so there's some push, especially within like the queer community, to rethink like what caregiving looks like or what being a mother or a parent looks like, where it can accommodate all of those different kinds of kin relationships that aren't just like biological human to biological human. Um, yeah, that was a very wandering sort of answer, but the response is that no, I haven't found like the right
Uh-huh.
term to describe my relationship to my dogs yet.
I'm curious, can I ask you a follow-up question on that Mother's Day card?
Yeah,
Did you end up walking away from that experience feeling good about having gotten the card or feeling bad about having gotten the card?
I think it was a mix. Like I felt bad that I probably made my sisters feel self-conscious or feel like they had to make it up to me in some sort of way. I didn't feel bad in the sense that they had like misrecognized me or misidentified me. I felt good, especially like getting a card from my nephew that was like, "You're a great aunt."
Yeah.
Um, and that mothering can be kind of more pluralistic. And I also didn't want to be rude and be like, "You gave me this Mother's Day card, but I'm not a mother." And so, sort of recognizing more the intention behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I myself, like you, I like the term companion because that definitely feels right. My dog is my companion. My dogs have always been my companions. The term guardian, I've come across this several times. It doesn't, I can't even put my finger on why, but I don't particularly like it. Maybe because it's just not in my active vocabulary, anyways. It's just not a term I would use for any kind of relationship, I think, unless it was, yeah, in a text of law or something. Um, I also refer to dog owners as owners, and I do see myself as my dog's owner. I'm curious, how do you feel about the word owner, which of course also comes with its problematic implications?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I have sort of qualms that I can't quite put my finger on about owner, because I'm kind of like, who am I to say that I own another being or creature? And I'm sort of wary of, even though I have a lot of property, I'm wary of like notions of property,
Mm-hmm.
especially with other living beings, I guess, even like plants and trees and things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, do you want to say more about why you do like the term owner? or feel comfortable using it?
I wouldn't say I like it, but I feel comfortable using it because it accurately describes the not the relationship part, but the way dogs are being perceived in the society we currently live in, with it, which is a capitalist society, which I am critical of, but still I'm a part of it. And my dogs, or my current dog Game, I bought her from a breeder, so I paid money for her, and that makes her, by definition, quote unquote, mine. So I own her now, quote unquote. And I do what I do like about this. I do want to own her in the sense that I'm the one who gets to make the decisions about her. I'm pretty critical of certain contracts that breeders ask puppy buyers in the US and Canada to sign, where one, the puppy is extremely expensive, and then two, the contract stipulates that you have no right to do this, you have no right to do that, you must neuter your dog by this age, you can only feed them raw, you must not breed them, they can never be off leash, I don't know, whatever, right? Or if you want to rehome them, the breeder has the first right to claim the dog back. I feel that is not right, because I feel as long as we are buying and selling living beings, which is very problematic in and of itself, but that's what it is right now. If I buy a dog, I want to have the power to make all decisions about this dog. Otherwise, I wouldn't have bought that dog. I would never sign a contract like that. And it's not common in Europe to do that. Usually, either there's no contract at all, you hand over the money, you get the puppy, or it's just a simple transfer of ownership. And I'm fine with both of those. But anymore, I wouldn't want to give up any more rights than I would give up if I was buying a car, honestly. For as long as I'm buying a dog with money, I feel like there is ownership, because otherwise we can't buy and sell living beings. And maybe we shouldn't buy and sell living beings. But as long as this dynamic exists, I do feel owner describes it appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
once I have bought the dog, I want to be able to decide what I feed my dog, how I live with my dog, whether I neuter my dog or not. I mean, that's a decision between me and my veterinarian, not a decision between me and the breeder. Because the breeder, well, if they wanted to have that decision power, they shouldn't have sold the puppy.
Right.
But that's why yeah. And I will use that term. I think I use that term in my lectures at FDSA classes too, or sometimes in my forum responses to students. But I'm curious, I may have used that in your homework thread, or maybe not directly addressing you, but talking about dog owners in general. Is that something that makes you feel uncomfortable, or like it doesn't feel quite right?
Um, I mean, yes and no. I think I agree with you completely that it's honest, right? It's saying like this is what we have done.
Yeah.
I paid money for this creature and now I have responsibility for it.
Yeah, that responsibility aspect is also something it implies.
Right.
I feel like because I'm my dog's owner, rather than being on par with them, if my dog eats the neighbor's chicken, that is my responsibility. But if the dog was on par with me and there was no power dynamic difference at all, well, then I could just say, well, it happened. The companion I share my life with made the decision to eat that chicken. Not my problem. So I feel like it implies some sort of social responsibility too. Just like if I have a car and I run someone over, it's my fault, right?
Right. Yeah. Although I wonder how far that analogy will go now that there are self-driving cars of like
Right. That's a
who
good
really bears that responsibility.
that's a good point. Yeah.
But I guess I wonder because you are a dog professional, you have so much more knowledge and experience than the average pet owner. Do you think you think of ownership differently than the majority of people? And your experience is also different because you've lived in so many different places too, where human relationships to non-humans are going to be very different in Mexico and Austria and the US and other places.
That's a good question. I've never thought about it. Like, what does ownership imply for you? as a not yet dog professional?
Yeah, well, when you were talking about the breeding contracts and stuff, like on the one hand, I can see why those might be in place, right? And I also volunteer at the Humane Society. And at the Humane Society, there are different fees, adoption fees, where like the puppies are really expensive, but the 12-year-old dog is almost free. And it's sort of to, I think, dissuade people who might impulse buy a puppy and then not actually have the means, whether financial or time or whatever, to take care of that puppy. Or the breeder contracts might be such that like that dog then isn't used for like dog fighting or animal cruelty or something. And so like we wouldn't do that with humans, right? You don't go home after delivering a child with something like you have to return it to the hospital if you don't take it for its first vaccinations or something. But I think like on the one hand, those sort of contracts are to protect the dog from bad owners or ill-informed owners. I don't know. I don't know. Like my parents were talking about getting a puppy, and now that I know a lot more, I was like, well, here are all the things you'd want to do to like set up the training. Like the dog's not just gonna happen to be a good dog. And they were like, oh, maybe we don't actually want a puppy now. My idea of ownership comes with a lot of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
But to go back to like a point you made early on about like rehoming, I think there's also some language that I see a lot, especially on social media, where people are like, you adopted this dog, now it's your responsibility. And if you rehome it, then that's like a grave moral error that you've made.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how dare you? When sometimes it is in the dog's best interest to be rehomed, right? Or other members of the household would be better, right? And so I think absolutely like pet ownership shouldn't be just like you show up someplace and all of a sudden you have a dog with no thought or consideration into what it means to provide a life for that creature. But on the other hand, we buy and sell dogs. So
Yeah.
I don't know. That was kind of a wandering answer, but those are just some of the things that I think about.
Yeah. I think your point about protecting or looking out for a dog who you have bred, that's a valid point. So I'm thinking of breeding games. There will not be any contracts for anyone, or it will be a simple transfer of ownership contract. But of course, I'm going to think about who I give the puppy to. And I'll do that by having a conversation with the person who's interested in the puppy. I feel like we can do that in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, if I felt so scared that people were going to do horrible things to the puppies, I wouldn't breed the dog in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
You may be able to hear the dog commenting on our conversation in the background.
Yes, I think Gabe has some feelings about this too.
So in the end, I trust my, yes, I know. Game just climbed up on my chair again for the for the listeners who can't see her. She's been on unlimited activity for 2 weeks. And just the other day, she finally got her stitches out. She had a minor surgery. And now she is so excited because she can move again. And after 2 weeks, Malinois, they won't just chill. So I think, yes, looking out for the puppies, for example, that you're going to give to someone would be important to me. I'm curious, and I've always been about seeing the development of the dog from really early on, because so far I've only experienced the development of a dog from like 8 weeks old onwards. But I want to see that first part too. How do they change? How does their experience of the world change? When does the fear response kick in? So I'm really curious about that. That's why I want to raise a litter of puppies out of scientific curiosity to see how they develop in that first part of life. And then selling them to me would probably just mean recover the financial investment I made in the puppies. Mm-hmm. So if a friend or if a former student in the US says, oh, I want one of your dog's puppies, I might just, well, they would have to pay for the crate that the dog is going to fly in. Like if I know that student, and FDSA students are usually really, really engaged dog owners. So I would probably have no problem. I would talk to them first. We might meet on Zoom, talk it through, and then I would send them the puppy on a plane, and they would buy the puppy's transportation fees and the puppy's crate. That would be it. I'm not interested in making money from breeding. That said, I do not think those contracts that you usually see in the US are in order to protect the puppies. I think they are in order to protect the breeder's breeding program. For example, the whole spay neuter thing. You need to spay and neuter your puppy by whatever age, and you must not breed that puppy. That is part of many, many contracts. I see it as problematic because many purebred dogs have a very limited gene pool already, which leads to many problems. And by basically forcing puppy buyers to sign that they will never breed that dog at an age when there is no way of knowing if that dog is going to develop into an adult who would contribute something amazing to the gene pool, like personality wise, for example, you're limiting the gene pool further. And the spay and neuter thing, I come from a country, Austria, where removing the reproductive organs of an animal is only permitted if it is medically necessary. I fully agree with that. So I did not grow up in a culture that sees it as responsible to spay and neuter dogs. I don't want to have any children, but I'm not spayed or neutered myself either, right? And also, like, the idea that people are unable, if I gave you a puppy and I thought you're not able to make sure that this puppy doesn't have accidental litters, I wouldn't give you the puppy in the first place. It's really not that hard. I've lived with intact dogs my entire life, and I've never had an accidental litter. It's really not that hard. Like, I also have never had an accidental child. It's not that hard.
Right.
I think what that clause in the contract comes from is that in the US and Canadian culture, it is considered a bad thing to, for example, if you like just sell the puppy and then they participate in an outcrossing project with that dog to expand the gene pool, the purebred community might stigmatize the breeder, right? So it's really to protect the breeder. But I think the problem here is the way certain breeders, of course not all of them, the way the culture has developed. It's not that those puppies will run amok and have litters left and right all the time, right?
Right.
That's my opinion, which is certainly influenced by the fact that I'm European. We don't usually have a dog overpopulation problem in most countries, and we also don't have those contracts. So that argument then is obviously flawed, in my opinion, that this is necessary in order to not have a dog overpopulation problem.
Yeah, I agree. And it's sort of like almost like the intellectual property of the breeder that they have
Yeah, exactly.
made these breeds happen. Yeah, because I think in the US too, there's also this idea, at least among like some people I know who are also work in like the animal industry, that there are so many dogs that already need homes. So if you get a dog from a breeder, then there's something wrong with you because you should have adopted or rescued a dog instead of getting a dog from a breeder, which I think is interesting because like we got our dogs from a rescue, and the rescue also had a contract that said like if we feel we cannot provide the right home for this dog, then it needs to go back to the rescue. There's something else I was thinking that I was going to say, but I forgot. So
it is interesting. Like, I've had dogs both from, the term rescue is also something I struggle with. So I'm trying to think of the word I want to use here.
Rehoming organization? I don't know.
Yeah, I've gotten dogs from rehoming organizations as well as from breeders. I know this is an argument that is often made. Also, that's an argument that to me seems invalid. There are great rehoming organizations and there are great breeders out there. Neither one of them is the problem. I don't think those are contradictions. You can have both. And usually if you get a dog from a breeder, it's because, or in my case, because I'm looking for something very specific. And I'm not going to find that at a rehoming organization, or the dog at the rehoming organization will already be neutered. And I'm very, like, the rehoming organizations also usually have strict contracts, and I am not a fan of those. I feel strongly about it, and that's the reason for me to just not go there anymore now. Yeah, I used to foster for a rehoming organization in Austria. So I would also meet with potential new homes for the foster dog. But the rehoming organization themselves would have the last word in where the dog would go, even though they, for example, the president of that organization had never even met that dog, right? I, as the foster, knew the dog better than the rehoming organization, obviously, because the dog was living with me 24/7. So I was meeting with people who were interested in that dog. And there was one person who I thought would be a great match for that dog. And I told the rescue organization, and they said no because of ageism. The person was, I don't know, like 72 or something. And they were like, well, what if this person dies? No, we're not giving our dogs to anyone over, I don't know, whatever. To me, this is completely ageist and ridiculous. This woman would have been a really good match for this dog, but she didn't get the dog because of her age. And experiences like that make me feel like, no, I don't want to participate in that kind of system.
Right.
I'd rather participate in the capitalist system of buying dogs. Yeah. I have less moral qualms about that, even though I still do. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess at least it's like not pretending to be something other than it is, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a little bit more transparent that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, but let me I interrupted you a while ago. I was gonna ask you if it makes you feel uncomfortable when I use the term owner in a lecture or in your homework thread. I'm really curious about that. I do want everyone to feel welcome in my classes, and I want it to be a safe space. So I would like to choose terms that I am not uncomfortable with and that my students are also comfortable with. So I'm curious, how does it make you feel if you read that term?
Fine, I guess. I think the language you use is pretty varied, right? And I think I can tell just from the structure of the classes that you're very thoughtful about it, and that our first homework assignments were all about building the relationship with the dog. So it wasn't like dog owner where the dog is like a piece of furniture, but about like building that kind of relationship. And like that's something I think about too, because I have human students. And so I think carefully about not only talking about parents, but about adults or grown-ups in people's lives or something like that. And so not trying to impose the language I'm comfortable with, but it's within like this greater context. So I don't know. I would find less of a problem with you using the language of owner than being like mom and dad, right? Which is also like the heteronormative sort of ideas as well. So yeah.
Okay, good. So I'll keep using that because I just haven't found a better term. I don't like guardian, and I definitely don't like mom and dad. That's never going to happen in my classes. So far, owner is the most comfortable, semi-neutral term I've come up with. But if you ever think of something better, let me know.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because the classes that we're in, right, it's for dog sports primarily. And so I think there's already probably a different relationship of the human to the dog than there would be if you were just teaching puppy classes for the general public. You know, it's maybe a little bit of selection bias or something of the population in these classes.
Yeah. I wonder actually if trainers who do teach primarily puppy classes are more inclined to use the word parents, because if that puppy, it's the child of another dog, but it's still a young animal, right?
Right.
And the dogs in my classes are usually adult dogs. I wonder if that also plays a role with how people are tempted into that binary heteronormative language.
Yeah, I do think that's interesting. I remember the thing I was going to tell you about ownership, which is maybe not a big thing, but right, you know, you take the dog to the vet and they're like, well, the dog needs a last name. And so I'm married, and in the US, it's very common for, especially for heterosexual couples, the woman to take the man's last name. But I was very against that for many reasons. So I was insistent when we took our dogs to the vet that they take my last name and they don't take my husband's last name, which is also sort of reflective of, I think, I'm just a little bit more excited about dog training and everything that goes with it, that I do make more of the decisions about their care and stuff. So it's reflective of that, but also sort of like the dog child will take my name and not his, which, yeah.
That is interesting. Like, to me, it makes perfect sense. An ex-partner of mine, I had dogs and they had dogs. And there was a very clear split. These are my dogs, these are your dogs. And we did our respective things with these dogs. That to me feels very natural because we have different philosophies and different methodologies, and we respect the other one's decisions for their dogs. But our own dogs, I expect my partner to respect my decisions about my dogs as well.
Mm-hmm.
That wouldn't happen if you had a human child with your husband. Obviously, you would be equals in having a say about where that child goes to school or kindergarten or whatever, right? So that's what's a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
You can be in a relationship and you can be the dog's quote unquote primary caregiver. Well, I guess in heteronormative relationships, that would also be the case because you're in a hetero marriage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So traditionally, you would probably be the child's primary caregiver.
No, right.
That sucks.
I know, and that's sort of like we had talked about this in our email exchanges or conversations about like the menu of options. And so
Yeah.
right, I would probably be the primary caregiver. You know, it's not untypical in hetero marriages for the mom to be the one making the doctor's appointments and all of that stuff. But I'm just really interested in dogs, right? And my husband loves dogs and he's an excellent dog human companion, whatever word you want to use. I should ask him how he thinks of it. But because I'm just really interested in it, I've selected that menu option. But I'm also really wary of the sort of baggage that goes with the woman being the primary caregiver. And so I think that is also one of the reasons why I sort of bristle about being the dog mom, is because it's sort of assumed by many people that the woman is going to be the one who is the caregiver and the other one is just sort of like the babysitter, not the parent, right? And sometimes like human children.
Yeah, I think that's also, that's definitely a cultural construct, right? And it depends on where in the world you're located and also what kinds of dogs you have.
Mm-hmm.
When I move in bitey dog sports circles, the majority of people training these dogs are guys. And they are obviously the dog's primary caregiver. And if they are in a hetero marriage, then their wife may not be interested in dogs at all and may have nothing to do with that dog. So I think it really totally depends on so many factors.
Yeah.
What is expected, right? Because, for example, in bite sports circles, it is traditionally a hetero guy sport, which is also changing, which is great. But it's due to the sport and the culture and the way it developed, I think.
Yeah, I've been wondering about that too, since I'm still pretty new to this whole world. Like I notice in the FDSA classes that I take that it tends to be almost exclusively women or people who identify as women. And then I was at our nosework competition and there was only one male competitor. And then like I teach at an all women's university. So I'm just interested in like how gender shows up in different sorts of things too. And so I don't know if it is the case that among more like positive reinforcement training tends to be more people who identify as women or
Maybe. I find it really hard to put my finger on why, for example, FDSA is such a white female identifying dominated community, because that's not representative of the world at all. If you move in so-called balanced training circles, there's more of a balance.
On the one hand, like I love it. I love the safe space because of like my hobbies and then my profession. It's not that I forget that men exist. It's just that on my day-to-day life, I don't encounter many besides like my husband. And so on the one hand, like I think that's great and I want to celebrate that. On the other hand, I don't know if it's reinforcing some of those gender stereotypes as well.
I do think it is, yeah. And it's interesting, like I wonder where exactly does that come from? And I don't think there are less men interested in positive reinforcement training.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too. I was talking to a colleague of mine in preparation for this. She works in feminist philosophy. So I was asking her about some like philosophy of motherhood and stuff. And so we were talking about positive reinforcement, and maybe one of the reasons why there's in some ways like cultural shifts about referring to people as like dog mom is a way to say like, I'm identifying as a dog mom because I wouldn't use punishment on a human child. So I'm not going to use punishment
Mm.
with my fur baby, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's sort of, yeah, I don't know if that goes with more of the positive reinforcement or not. Like, I'd be curious of just the language people use to describe their relationships, and then also what training philosophies they have or don't have.
Yeah, yeah. There definitely are balance trainers who do. And I mean, I'm never quite sure if someone uses the word chokingly or seriously to their dogs as their kids.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. Like I'll have to ask a few people. I don't want to make assumptions.
Right, right.
Yeah. But something else I wanted to ask you about in your part of the world, you mentioned that sometimes you enter a space and you're a woman of a certain age and everyone, or it feels as if the people around you expect you to have human children and you don't, but then they find out you have a dog or two dogs and you've described their expression of relief.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about that. What does that feel like? When does that tend to happen and how do you react?
Yeah, I found it, especially meeting people who are a little bit older than I am in my part of the world in the Midwest, where very often people get married at a younger age than they might on like the East or the West Coast.
How big is the city you live in?
I should probably know. I've lived here for like 5 years. I think within the city itself, it's like 300,000, and then the suburbs
Mm-hmm.
get a little bit bigger. Yeah. And, there's sort of the conservative insistence on family values and stuff, which you see permeating a lot of the culture. But when introducing myself, it seems like the small talk is usually, what do you do? Oh, do you have kids? And I say no. And then something comes out about my dogs, and they're like, oh, okay, now I have like a frame of reference to like make sense of your life. And I've felt, and I don't know that the person is consciously thinking this, and I shouldn't make assumptions, but a sort of relief, it seemed, that I'm still performing some sort of like maternal thing. Or a few months ago, I was at a thing with colleagues, and one of them asked like how Lily was, and just said, how's Lily? And Lily, the dog, has a human name. We didn't name her, that's what she came with. And I said, oh, she's great. We're redoing the backyard. And I've been thinking about putting a pool in there so she can swim. And then one of my colleagues
Nice.
was like, oh, I didn't know that you had a daughter. And I was like, it's not a daughter, it's my dog that I want to build a pool for. So then I felt like ridiculous, right? That I'm like designing my dream backyard with a pool for my dogs, as if like that's so absurd. But building a pool for a human child would be perfectly intelligible.
But your colleague knew that Lily was a
The
dog.
one did, but the other one, who was part of the conversation, did not
Oh,
know
okay.
that Lily was a dog. Yeah. Or we have like family friends, and they'll ask like one sister about her son, and then they'll ask my other sister about her son, and then they're like, oh, and how are your dogs, right? And so I think it's a recognition again of important relationships in my life, but sort of like substitute dog children for human children is weird. And I don't know if it would be different if I were child free, not by choice. I think I'd probably have a lot more complicated feelings about that. But because I've decided not to have human children, that I'm almost a little insulted, or maybe I'm just self conscious about then when people presume that the dogs are filling a kind of gap or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, that's a good point, and you're probably right about that. That assumption is probably being made. You sent me an article you were reading a while back. I'll put the reference in the show notes and I remember the authors. Among other things, there was mention of a TV show called Dog Moms, which I had never heard of. I like looked for it on YouTube and I found it, at least on this one episode of a show that probably has lots of episodes that I watched. It seemed very clear to me that these women identified as dog moms and embraced that role. And also, I, as a viewer, and that's probably because of the way it was presented, because of the way the producers and of the show made it seem, did have the impression that for them, these dogs did fill a hole.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how they actually feel, right? Because you can do so much in editing and you can create a completely different persona than the person is in real life.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it seemed absolutely ridiculous, but also, I mean, I would never be on a reality TV show because like they are all ridiculous. Doesn't matter the topic, but to me, anyways. But I do feel like at the same time, if you want to be a dog mom and if you want to embrace that and if you want to call yourself that and if you want the dog to fill a hole in your life, well, do so, right? I feel like that should also be an option on the menu.
Right.
It should just not be assumed that that's why everyone has dogs, because for me, that's certainly not the reason.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have human children no matter whether I had dogs or not. These two are completely independent from each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
At least they're in my mind, in my conscious mind.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I was, like I said, I was thinking about preparing is strong. Like I didn't like prepare stuff specifically for this, but I was looking at like Instagram and TikTok to see what would show up when I search for dog mom.
Mm-hmm.
And on TikTok, especially, there's women, and I think like because TikTok skews to a younger audience, right? But they
Mm-hmm.
seem mostly in their 20s, and many of them are presenting themselves as I'm a dog mom because I don't need anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was also sort of like dog mom is the new MILF.
Yeah.
So saying like I am a desirable person, but I'm also satisfied with this relationship, having a dog companion. I thought that was also really interesting to sort of like, it's not filling a gap. It's this other identity that I'm positively choosing.
Yeah.
But it's still maybe kind of fraught with different ideas about like femininity and stuff.
Wow. So maybe there's another generation that adds another item to the menu. Maybe some of the items on the menu are problematic. Most of the items on the menu I would probably not choose for myself. But I would like people to be able to choose whatever dish they want to order.
Mm-hmm.
What I would not want is that the person waiting the table just serves me a certain plate without asking me.
Right. Yeah. And like that's probably something else of like Midwest culture is like I'm vegetarian, like almost vegan, and in the state everything comes like covered in cheese and bacon. It's so funny. Like a restaurant, like metaphorically or literally, that has a real plurality is sometimes challenging.
Yeah. Well, maybe you'll have to move. If you give up your academic career to become a dog trainer, you can.
That's right. But I think that that's also, shows the sort of like fraught relationship of having a dog, right? That like I don't consume meat, but I buy a lot of meat, and Lily is now on like a fresh cooked diet. So I'm like cooking all of this meat for her and like finding like the best sourced fish I could possibly find, even though like I won't ingest it. I still think it's really important to find like, I will say like the most ethically sourced or something, as if like there's a perfect solution to that. But there's no purity of morals or anything when it comes to having a dog.
Right. So you don't consume meat because of ethical reasons?
Yeah, I was sort of like,
not because of reasons of you don't like the taste of it.
No, I do really like the taste of it.
Yeah. But you also feel like, because there are vegetarian diets for dogs, right? There's kibble that's vegetarian,
right?
But you feel that that wouldn't be fair,
right? And like I don't know enough about dog biology, and I'm not like convinced about things like dogs as wolves in the wild, because like they've been domesticated for so long that the sort of primal arguments I think don't really necessarily hold. But I want to do what is best for Lily, and it seems like, as far as I know, and I'm totally open to being convinced otherwise, that meat is good for her.
Yeah, no, I'm not a canine nutritionist either, so dogs are omnivores.
Right.
That's pretty much the end of my knowledge.
Right.
I do think they can thrive on all kinds of different diets, simply because I see the free roaming dogs around me thriving on all kinds of different diets. But yeah, like you, I want my dog to be athletic and eat well. And sometimes she eats better than I do. One other thing I wanted to ask you brought up in the very beginning of our conversation was that when you were looking at different dog trainers in your area, they would use the dog's voice to refer to you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Mom, I want cookies. I don't think I do that as much when I'm teaching in person, but when I'm giving feedback on someone's video, I will do timestamps. And sometimes I will give the dog a voice, like a human voice, as if the dog spoke English.
Mm-hmm.
The dog will never address the owner as mom or dad or any other parental word. They will usually not address them directly, or they will say the person's name. But how do you feel about that as a student?
Yeah. I've taken a few different FDSA classes and I like your feedback the best.
Oh, thank you.
Not that the other trainers are lacking in any way or anything, but it was, I think because it was so conversational, I really liked that. And I think there's, especially me as like a pretty novice trainer, I feel a lot of pressure to get it right. And so I think when it comes from the dog's perspective, whatever that might mean, it's a little bit easier to hear like what is working and maybe what could be improved upon. And I think there was an exchange that you had with another student where it's like, I don't want to anthropomorphize too much, but the dog is showing this behavior. And it seems like the most reasonable interpretation of that behavior would be this mindset or this particular emotion. And so I think that sort of feedback that's in the dog's voice is always matched to very specific demonstrations of behavior, right? And so it's not just sort of inventing something, but a way to process what it is that this creature could be experiencing when I have no way of being in its mind otherwise.
Yeah, like it doesn't seem problematic to you.
No, because I think it's careful, and so I think and it's very thoughtful. Yeah.
No, you're right. I think I often use it, for example, when timing could be improved on the handler's part. I'll often have the dog, like when I see, okay, this will be the ideal moment for the human to do something, I will put that timestamp and have the dog say, click me now, or something like that. And then 10 seconds later, the human actually does click. So I'll do another timestamp and the dog will say, finally.
Right.
So because I don't want to say, I would like you to improve your timing.
Right.
I just want you to become aware of it, right? And I think that's why I primarily do it. And also because I want you to laugh along with me. I want my class, it's really, really important to me for my classes to be fun and relaxing rather than stressful. That's even more important than what you actually learn in that class. Because I feel like so much of our lives is stressful, and many dog trainers will put a lot of stress on the human, and that's not the only way, and in my opinion also not the best way to learn. And I want to create this learning environment that just feels comfortable and easygoing.
Yeah, I think exactly. And I think, right, if you want the person to improve mechanics, or like I want to improve my mechanics, then doing it in the dog's voice is like, oh yes, I should be attending to those very subtle changes of behavior that the dog is doing, and not just focus specifically on like, did I click it exactly 10 seconds or something? And so it's sort of this shifting the weight of attention to where it really ought to be.
And I think I don't think I do that in real life training, because you can't point out specific moments because real life just passes, right? But in the video, I'm assuming that, or I hope my students sometimes watch back the video with my commentary, and then they look at the body language,
right,
and see that moment, and then the next time they will recognize that moment when it happens in real time. But I can't do that commentary in real time because there are so many things happening, and the click is like a split second, for example.
Right. Yeah, I think that is interesting too. I'm just thinking about like my own teaching, that I think when I started, I was very, I guess I'd say rigid, like you have to do these things and you should know these philosophers and stuff. And now it's more important to me to sort of cultivate a joy, because then we can do these really super difficult things, but then it's sort of wanting to do it and setting up a space where people can learn and not just get so overwhelmed by the intimidation of doing difficult things too.
I feel like many people have experienced an educational system that was very intimidating. And so like I see that in my classes when students feel like they can only show me their very best session. But that's not the session that my feedback will be most helpful for.
Mhm.
I need to see the session where something went wrong so I can help you to avoid things going wrong in that same way in the future, right?
Right.
So I want them to be comfortable doing that. And I feel like often I'm working against a huge history of negative experiences or of being put down
Right.
in an educational system.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, there's lots of things that I could criticize about educational systems in general, but I don't. I just try to to make my own classroom a safe space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think it has. And I think, play, right? It's all about play.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. It should be a playful space.
Yeah.
Which is also, well, I'll have to invite you back on to talk about that too. I don't want to keep you too long and also our Zoom time is about to run out.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your, I'm sure, very busy day to talk to me. That has been so much fun. You're really, like, I've really enjoyed talking to you, both going off the path in my class and also today, because you really think about things. And I find that very, I love getting that kind of feedback and those thoughtful inputs. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So if our listeners would like to get in touch with you or learn more about the work you're doing, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. I have a website, which is like my academic stuff. It's CatherineHoman.com, CatherineHoman.com.
Mm-hmm.
And that has like my philosophy, CB, and that stuff. And then on Instagram, as a side hobby, I have an Instagram devoted to pies. It's called Pielism, Pihilism. I can't like think and spell at the same time. And that I started as a way to think like, this is sort of my one precious life, and I should be doing things that are creative. And what can I do to create meaning? So pies and a kind of creative nihilism that if there's no meaning, I'll create it. So
I love it.
That's me.
Thank you. I'll put the links in the show notes. And I'm thinking about pie and I want one. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And I hope to see you soon in a future class.
Yes, I will be there with Lily. So thank you so much. This was really so much fun to talk with you more. So thanks.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye.